and welcome to Inside Politics. I'm Anastasiya Lavrina. On November 18 in Baku, the First U.S. Azerbaijan Think Tank Forum unfolded as a defining moment in the evolving relationship between Washington and Baku. Throughout the day, analysts, diplomats and policy experts delve into the issues that are reshaping the region's strategic landscape. The upcoming strategic charter, Azerbaijan's emerging role within the new C6+1 format, the future of the Middle Corridor, post-conflict dynamics in the South Caucasus, and the growing U.S. focus on Central Asia. What became clear is that the dialogue between the two countries is entering a new phase, deeper, more structured, and closely aligned with the broader geopolitical shifts transforming Eurasia. And joining us now is one of the participants of the Think Tank Forum, Eugene Chausovsky, Senior Director, Analytical Development and Training, New Lines Institute in Washington, United States. Eugene, welcome to Inside Politics.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for coming here in our studio. And after spending the day inside the First U.S. Azerbaijan Think Tank Forum, what stood out to you the most?
Well, I think this was a great opportunity. I think in the wake of this diplomatic agreement between Armenia and Azerbaijan, overseen and mediated by the U.S., for experts and policymakers to gather and really take the page forward, I think, at this point. So it was great to see the level of participation, the level of engagement, a lot of differing perspectives, but all centered around the opportunities that come now in the wake of this diplomatic agreement and looking at economic cooperation, strategic cooperation, and taking things to the next level.
Well, the strategic charter has suddenly become the centerpiece of the conversation between the experts and policymakers, diplomats at the forum. And I guess this is one of the key issues to being discussed since the 8th of August, that meeting held in Washington between the President Donald Trump and President of the Republic of Azerbaijan, Ilham Aliyev. So why is it so pivotal at this moment, and what are the core issues both sides are trying to shape before it's finalized?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's still a lot of details to be worked out for sure, but the timing is very important, obviously from Azerbaijan's perspective, to basically move forward with the plans that have been in the works for many years in terms of connectivity efforts, whether it's the Middle Corridor, energy corridors, things of that nature. And now with the backing and the kind of more substantial support from the United States, which is a very important actor, to actually see those plans through with that level of backing. From the U.S. perspective, there's a number of different motivations here from the Trump administration. First and foremost is Trump's basically efforts to be a peacemaker, be a mediator in various conflicts or post-conflict scenarios around the world, but also in a very kind of pragmatic way, the competition with China, the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war. These are things that are big challenges for the United States, and I think this region, Azerbaijan in particular, can help in a very strategic way, whether it be through connectivity efforts, through energy, through diplomacy. So it's really a convergence of all of those interests that make this timing very critical.
So there is still competition in between of the big powers toward the developments in the South Caucasus. I mean, United States, China, and Russia.
Absolutely, and so this is an area where obviously those powers converge. I think that the U.S. has been somewhat absent, I think, from this region in the past few years. Russia and China, of course, with its own economic efforts, the Belt and Road Initiative. These are countries that are close by, that are quite active in various ways. And so that brings many challenges, and that brings also opportunities. And now with the U.S. back in the game, so to speak, I think this is a very important moment, and one that can hopefully be mutually beneficial. Just because there's competition, it doesn't mean that there has to be some level of conflict. There are issues to be managed, and we're seeing this directly in the U.S.-China relations on things like trade and technology, generally speaking. But I think this is an area where there's going to be a lot of geopolitical dynamism, but hopefully it can be to the benefit of Azerbaijan and the regional countries.
You rightly mentioned that within the last 5 years, especially during the Biden's administration, the presence of the United States was neglected in the region of the South Caucasus. In the parallel, China is growing and is promoting its Belt and Road initiative, which also coincide with a middle corridor. So do you think that in Washington there is a clear understanding that the presence of China in the region will be also growing, and how Washington can manage and deal with that?
I think there is a very clear understanding, and with that comes that level of increased engagement that we're seeing right now. I think one important component of this, for example, it's not just Azerbaijan and the South Caucasus, but also Central Asia, which has become a key point of focus for the U.S. Whether that's continuing the efforts of the C5+1 from a diplomatic standpoint, whether that's the critical minerals agreements that are being signed and energy agreements and things of that nature. So these are all areas where China has been quite active and where China has an upper hand to a certain extent over the US. So I think seeing that level of activity is very notable, and one that Azerbaijan can leverage for its own benefits in terms of this post-conflict environment. So I think this will be a crucial element moving forward.
Yesterday, one of the participants of the forum also mentioned that the American interest in the region of the South Caucasus coincide with the interest in Central Asia, especially after that meeting held in Washington, C5+1. And now everybody is mentioning C6+1. So what are your expectations from this new format of cooperation?
Right, so I think this is a very natural evolution of US engagement with both sides of the Caspian, so to speak. Obviously Central Asia, which we just discussed, and then Azerbaijan as well. So I think this is something that's very important to basically connect these two regions. This is, as was mentioned in the conference yesterday, almost a choke point of the middle corridor, meaning that this is where things converge and where things can either be enhanced if there's that level of integration, of economic activity, or where things can be disrupted if there's some level of conflict or geopolitical level disruption. So I think the U.S. recognizing this, and something that I've been advocating for quite some time, which is that Azerbaijan is a kind of a natural part of this grouping, and hopefully, I think we're starting to see that become formalized. And the next step is actually to implement that level of economic activity, hopefully with the backing and support of the United States.
Well, indeed, that sounds very optimistic for near future. But let's go back to the August 8th meeting in Washington between the Prime Minister of Armenia, Nikol Pashinyan, and President of Azerbaijan, Ilham Aliyev. How much did that moment shift the broader regional landscape, and how does it fit into today's U.S. policy agenda?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think it was a momentous moment, but one that had a lot of precursors to it. These negotiations were obviously ongoing for quite some time, well before the Trump administration came back into office. And I think it was quite notable, and just to give credit to both Azerbaijan and Armenia for basically having direct negotiations that were making a lot of progress on some of the very important issues, whether it's border delimitation, whether it's economic elements as well. And that really paved the way for when the Trump administration came into office, and there was more attention now from the US on this region that it could culminate in such an agreement. Now, this is just another step towards hopefully a further expansion of those ties diplomatically. It will align with, I think, US efforts, as we already talked about, with Central Asia as well, and really to take it one step forward in terms of those concrete and sustained level of engagement. This is a difficult thing in the US. Foreign policy tends to shift with every administration, but I do think that it's very telling that, for example, C5+1 was something that spanned numerous administrations, going back to the Obama administration, through Trump, Biden, and now back to Trump as well. So hopefully that can be leveraged and that momentum can take place with Azerbaijan and the middle corridor as well.
So in the context of today's shifting regional dynamics, what opening and what potential setbacks do you see for moving the Armenia-Azerbaijan peace process forward? What do we need?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think, in terms of the opening, it's just basically to follow through now with that momentum that's been gained. So we don't want to kind of settle and see, there's been this agreement and everything will take care of itself. No, there's still a lot of hard work to do, as I mentioned, particularly on the economic side of things, to actually implement, whether that be that corridor between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Turkey obviously gets involved here as well as the broader regional players. But there are challenges. I think it's important to note, whether it's potential spoiling roles from countries that may not be as interested, or will at least try to shift the level of connectivity in their directions. And here I'm thinking countries like Russia and to a lesser extent Iran. There's still political challenges to overcome, I think, in both countries. But I do think that strategic and that broader momentum is there. And there's been willingness out of both Baku and out of Yerevan to get to where we are now. And hopefully with Washington's backing, those challenges can be overcome.
You mentioned the economic cooperation and the transport links between the two countries, and Zangezur corridor is among the top. The talks about this new transport link started since in November 2020 with the first statement signed between Azerbaijan, Armenia and Russia. But Armenia ignored it within the last 5 years until the August 8th meeting in Washington, where there was a precise and concrete negotiations between the sides on how to proceed further. So how can you explain the position of Donald Trump toward this particular corridor to be developed? Because it's mostly be mentioned by him as a Trump's corridor as well. Yes. So for the future, how do you see United States may coordinate the development? Whether it will be only the support provided by words, by intentions to see the peaceful development, or there will be the concrete steps by the Trump's administration?
Yeah, so I think that, giving Trump's name behind this corridor, this TRIP, TRIPP, I think it's in, very much in Trump fashion to do such things. But at the same time, it does give a level of backing and a level of, sustained commitment from the United States in order to see that through. I think that Donald Trump and the Trump administration has an interest in showing the benefits of this corridor. And this really comes from what I call a very transactional foreign policy, and I don't mean that in either a positive or a negative way, but it's a foreign policy that's basically centered around deal making, one that serves U.S. interests, whether at home or abroad, but that can be beneficial, and I think it will be beneficial to countries that engage with it in a way that kind of serves those interests. So here I'm talking about levels of access to resources or levels of investment, from these countries into the United States and vice versa. So I think this very much tracks with what the Trump administration has been doing all over the world, but I think this region in particular is uniquely positioned to actually see it through. We've seen, levels of diplomacy that have not been successful so far in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, for example, or even some engagement in other areas where there's some progress, but then there's setbacks. But here, I think the forces are converging to make this particularly successful, hopefully.
So it's in the interests of Trump's administration to proceed further with the further implementation of this project to be done as soon as possible.
Absolutely, because not only the economic benefits, but also that can serve as a means to guaranteeing that peace continues, that we don't return into a conflict environment or there's some level of geopolitical disruption. So this is an area that, like I said, that whether it's from a diplomatic perspective, an economic perspective, or a security perspective, or really all of the above, it does kind of align with the U.S. interests.
Well, yesterday participants also mentioned the outcome of the cooperation, strategic cooperation between Azerbaijan and the United States as from the perspective of the security, as two sides can also promote the security and stability in the region of the South Caucasus. So more in details, if I may ask, how the cooperation between two countries can also contribute to the promotion of security level in the region of the South Caucasus?
Well, this is a very challenging environment, and I think we'll have to see what actually plays out. First you have this strategic agreement. Those can take on many forms, but I think very clearly in a very direct way, it's, as I mentioned, kind of preventing any re-emergence of security disruptions within the region, starting first and foremost with Azerbaijan and Armenia, obviously involving other countries like Turkey as well. But here it's important to point out that this region is very strategically located, and it's very close to other hotspots For example, the Middle East, where we've seen a lot of activity in U.S. engagement to try to get out of a conflict environment, whether it's in the Gaza theater, whether it's in Syria, and Iran, which of course, Azerbaijan has a border with and has important relations with many of those actors that are involved as well. So this can be, Azerbaijan can play a very important role there in terms of helping U.S. interests in that region, with the Russia-Ukraine conflict as well. Azerbaijan having relations with both countries. So these are areas that I think that kind of in light of that transactional kind of idea where it's mutually beneficial, you help in one area and we help in another. And so as long as that can move forward, then I think that strategic partnership will really live up to its name.
So we should expect Washington and Baku to cooperate in other parts of the world as well. Let's say yesterday some participants mentioned Syria, for example, and there were much expectations from Azerbaijan and Turkey since political changes happened in Syria. So Azerbaijan could also be as a mediator in between of Turkey and Israel, for example, or in any other part of the world where the United States has its own interest as well.
Yeah, this is actually something that was brought up, I think, in the conference, and it was a very good point, is that the U.S., it's not that it's abandoning or it's removing itself from parts of the world. In fact, quite the opposite, as we've seen. But it does like to defer to regional states as well, because bandwidth is limited, resources are limited. U.S., on the priority list, China, Russia are high. So that doesn't mean that this region doesn't matter, but it wants to basically work with regional actors such as Azerbaijan or such as Turkey in order to serve its interests. So in that sense, as I mentioned, the more that can actually move forward in terms of assisting with what U.S. diplomatic initiatives, whether it be the Abraham Accords or whether it be the post-conflict environment in Syria, I think will be very beneficial to things like enhancing connectivity efforts and promoting that level of economic activity for Azerbaijan in the region.
Well, the global interests, again, I want to understand more in details trade and economic competition, which is still on the agenda between China and the United States. And here in the region, so Belt and Road, this corridor is being promoted by China at the highest level, and we cannot ignore this fact as well. And knowing the approach of Donald Trump towards China's development, even though two leaders met just recently, and then Donald Trump called Xi Jinping as a great leader, what if their interests are overlapped in the region of the South Caucasus? How it may affect the U.S. interests in a partnership and cooperation with Azerbaijan and Armenia, for example, how it will affect the logistics. The presence of China in the region of the Central Asia is also growing, so and we cannot ignore this fact. Then how do you expect Donald Trump will try to manage this crisis? Do you expect him to withdraw from this region, to start any kind of principal cooperation with China or something else?
Well, I think the U.S.-China relationship is a complex one. So obviously there is competition. China is I think the largest or most influential peer competitor or potential competitor to the U.S. But at the same time, they need each other economically, in terms of bilateral trade, and we've seen that through the trade negotiation process, starting with large tariffs and kind of going backwards from there, and now we're in sort of a trade truce, as it were. But there's also still a lot of competition, for example, in areas of technology, where China is trying to catch up to and surpass the United States. And so these things can happen simultaneously, where you have cooperation on the economic front, but still, in the context of geopolitical competition. When it comes to, the South Caucasus, and I would expand it to the broader, Caspian region, this is an area where, for example, the focus of the U.S. on critical minerals is so important, because this is an area where actually China has leverage over the United States, being a main producer and a large refiner of those critical minerals, which are important to everything in our lives, from our smartphones to electric vehicles to military applications, right? So this is where I think that the U.S. has been seeking out places that it can help to diversify its reliance on China, just as China is reliant on U.S. advanced technology, and it's pursuing its own diversification. So I think from a broader perspective, overall trade is an area where China and the U.S. can align or can converge in this region. The U.S. is never going to be giving the kind of resources or investments or infrastructure development that China is pursuing, because it doesn't need that to the level that China does, right? But at the same time, it can engage in areas of advanced technology, of seeking that access to critical minerals and other energy resources, whether for itself or partners like the Europeans. So all of these forces come into play, I think, in the South Caucasus and in the Caspian region, where we're going to see, I think, some level of both that competition but also collaboration.
I guess this is a unique case when the middle corridor becoming in interest of two sides together. When yesterday it was highly covered by all participants, United States is interested to see the transport linkage development in the region. That's meaning the middle corridor, and middle corridor is a part of the Belt and Road Initiative of China. So the interests of two superpowers are overlapped in the region of the South Caucasus and Central Asia. Well, as a foreigner, as an expert who is coming from the United States, I'm very much interested to ask this question. How do you assess Azerbaijan's current foreign policy balance between the United States, the European Union, Turkey, China again? Is Baku succeeding in maintaining strategic autonomy?
That's a good question. So I think that absolutely, I would say that Azerbaijan's pursuit of this multi-vector foreign policy, which has existed for quite some time, everything that we've been seeing, whether it's this this diplomatic agreement and the advancement of the negotiations with Armenia, now the U.S. getting involved and bringing in other countries into this middle corridor project, I think is a sign of the effectiveness and the success of this foreign policy balancing. And one, by the way, which I think that Armenia is starting to take a page from that playbook to a certain extent. I think it's, in that case, it was reliance, or you can argue over-reliance on one particular actor, which was perhaps not the most dependable, especially in a crisis type of situation, that forced Armenia to reevaluate its options and look to not necessarily replacing Russia, but to diversifying to whether it's to the United States, to the European Union, even to some other countries like China to some extent. So I think that the effectiveness of Azerbaijan's foreign policy and its balancing act has been seen in everything that we're discussing today. Now, it's still a very challenging environment. It's still a region that's surrounded by larger powers that are all trying to influence the situation. Right. Even what you mentioned in terms of the middle corridor, yes, there is a degree of shared interest between China and the United States, but how they see the middle corridor and where they want it to go differs, right? Obviously, and can contrast in that sense. So this is the environment which Azerbaijan finds itself, which has always been in this environment, and it's very important to have that level of maneuvering where it's focused on its interests, and the relationships between various actors, including some former adversaries, can change in that regard. So as long as that keeps happening and does so in a sustainable way, I think that Azerbaijan will be in a good position, or as best of a position as it can be.
Well, and how do you evaluate the role of Turkey in this particular issue? So is Ankara becoming a bridge between the United States policy and regional actors?
I think so. And I think it's worth mentioning here that a lot of Azerbaijan's successes is in part thanks to Turkey and its role. Obviously, with the collaboration that they've had in the economic sphere, in the security sphere, this I think was one of the factors, not the only factor, but one of the factors in terms of the wars that we saw, and Azerbaijan's victory over Karabakh. And now it's a very important part of the diplomatic process as well. So as the diplomatic negotiations between Azerbaijan and Armenia have progressed, there's been parallel talks between Armenia and Turkey, which have always been linked to one another. And then you get into other theaters, whether it's Syria, as you mentioned before. This is definitely a country that the U.S. does look to. They've got their own challenges as well. Obviously, there's no kind of perfect relationships here, but I think that Turkey is going to be a very important component of this, both for the U.S. as well as Azerbaijan.
So Eugene, thank you. Thank you so much for coming to our studio and sharing with us your valuable experience.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Thank you. Well, the forum showed that the conversation between Azerbaijan and the United States is no longer about managing crisis, but about shaping the future from connectivity and security to the broader strategic map of Eurasia. As these discussions continue to deepen, Azerbaijan's role is only becoming more central, and the choices made now will define the direction of the region for years to come. This is Inside Politics. I'm Anastasiya Lavrina. Thank you for watching and stay with us for more clarity, context and conversations that matter.